Autumn Blum is a native Floridian and serial entrepreneur. She combines her passion as an ocean advocate with her background as a cosmetic chemist as the CEO of Stream to Sea, a company setting this new standard for sustainable, safe body care products and sunscreen. She's working in support of toxic sunscreen bans around the world. Autumn has testified before the USVI Senate, presented to the National Science Academy, and submitted testimonies in Hawaii, Key West, and numerous other island locations. Formulating and bringing to market products that contribute first to people and the planet and then to profit has been her goal throughout her entire career. Recently inducted to the Women's Divers Hall of Fame, Autumn is also a technical scuba diver, shark advocate, and underwater photographer. She says has some excellent pictures on her website too. Check that. Do you believe that Reef Safe Sunscreens generally help protect the marine environment? Right now, we have 43% of you say yes, and 55% of you say no. So we're going to see who moves the needle one way or the other. And we're going to start with Autumn. So Autumn, you get to start, and we're going to call up your slides. And here we go. You got 10 minutes.
Fantastic. I think you muted yourself. All right.
Right. I will chime in 1 minute when you have 1 minute left. So
perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Well, I really appreciate that introduction. It is such an honor to be here today. I can't believe that so many people are that interested in this topic among this group. It's exciting for me. My goal, of course, is to show you how very real this conversation is. Whether Reef Safe Sunscreen is real or it's marketing fluff, of course, my goal is to convince the other 57% of you. I don't think I can introduce myself as well as Perry did. Thank you for that. I am a lifelong ocean advocate, member of the Women Divers Hall of Fame, and a cosmetic chemist. I've been formulating natural skincare, clean skincare for more than 25 years. And what I really wanted to share is that I founded Stream to Sea after I saw an oil slick coming off a group of snorkelers when I was scuba diving in Palau. That was the first time that I thought about how the products that I had been formulating, putting out in the world, might impact not just our bodies, but the aquatic environment as well. It was a different thought process for me. So now, instead of just making products that are safe for us, I focus on formulating sunscreen and body care that's safe for us and for our blue planet. So during our talks and throughout the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to ask that you keep an open mind. What if the products you and I make and use actually can make a difference for our declining waters? And if they do make a difference, why on earth wouldn't we be making them? I want to start by sharing a memory. 100 years ago, a grandmother said that there wasn't a pollution problem. They didn't believe there was. About 50 years ago, an old mariner told my husband on a shrimp boat that the solution to pollution is dilution. We didn't believe that we could hurt our waters way back then. Today, we all know better. We also know that small problems have a tendency to turn into really big ones, and small solutions really can make a difference in our world. I'm the type of person who believes that if you have the chance to do better, if there's a better option, you absolutely should take it. And that's what I want you thinking about in regards to developing and using safer products. So how much sunscreen is actually in our waters? It's estimated that up to 14,000 tons of sunscreen enters our waters from tourism activities each year. And where there's people, there's pollution. Sunscreen pollution is now said to be a symptom of unsustainable tourism, and it absolutely is a pollution. There's numerous research studies that have shown that the chemicals in sunscreens don't just biodegrade and wash away. Many of them bioaccumulate in the reefs, in the fish, in the coral, and in the sand. It's also important to know that much of the sunscreen that's released in our waters doesn't just come from tourism. It's not just the beachgoers and the scuba divers and the snorkelers. The FDA's MUST trial that was done in 2019, which was focused on determining if the organic chemical filters are safe for humans, which they did not establish, by the way, that established that the common organic UV filters accumulate in our bodies after just one application, and they can be detected in your urine within 30 minutes of applying to your skin. If they're in your urine, they're also in our wastewater. And we know that the wastewater treatment facilities do not filter out the organic chemical UV absorbers. Another paper that was recently published using government standardized ecological risk assessments and real-world environmental concentrations, that's important, showed that beach showers are another source of that pollution. Again, remember, these ingredients bioaccumulate. So let's talk briefly about what some of these chemicals actually do to the coral and the fish. We know that oxybenzone is related to an herbicide that Monsanto developed and patented in the 1950s called benzophenone. It disrupts photosynthesis in plants and in coral. These ingredients have been shown to deform healthy coral larvae, making them inert, which prevents the reef from repopulating. If you can't repopulate, you die. When coral is exposed to environmentally relevant concentrations of some of these absorbers, it leads to increased and even complete coral bleaching, disrupts the DNA, and some of these chemicals are known endocrine disruptors. It's been said that the way that an endocrine system works in a mouse, in a bird, in a fish, in a human, and in a coral isn't all that different. They disrupt the developmental cycle of many species, including coral and aquatic organisms. I also want to point out that it's not just coral that we're concerned with. Studies have been published showing contamination in fish and turtles and even dolphins, and it screws up the developmental cycle. This was a study done on a dotty-back larva in an ecotox lab that showed that when it was exposed to chemical-based sunscreen, the middle fish there, after 24 hours, its internal organs exploded. The other one had a brain aneurysm. So the first study indicating that sunscreen causes coral bleaching was published by Don Navarro and his team in 2008. In that study, corals were taken from the environment. They were exposed to sunscreen in saltwater tanks in a very basic toxicity trial. All of those coral bleached. Critics of that study quickly point out the conditions were a far cry from what actually happens in the ocean. Regardless, people began to seriously question sunscreen safety to our delicate ecosystem, and that triggered more studies. Many, many, many more studies. In 2016, Dr. Craig Downs, a renowned coral toxicologist, the founder of Hereticus Environmental Labs, and his team received worldwide attention when they showed that oxybenzone can cause deformities in both coral larvae and baby coral, damage coral DNA, and cause abnormal skeletal growth. Again, industry lobbyists and opponents very quickly and very loudly said the concentrations in those studies weren't relevant. But they obviously didn't read the study, or they didn't want you to, because not only did that team establish relevant concentrations in the real world, but they replicated those concentrations in the lab and in multiple labs, again, around the world. It was a very well done study. You can see here in Hawaii, down in Hana, where it's too rough to swim, there's no sunscreen pollution. But if you move over to Hanama Bay, where more than 4,000 parts per trillion was measured, you can see why that reef is dead. That study also established that as little as 62 parts per trillion was enough to prevent coral larvae from growing. 62 parts per trillion is kind of hard to visualize. They extrapolated it's the equivalent of one drop in the 6 Olympic-sized swimming pools, so it does not take much. They also sampled St. John and the Virgin Islands and found extremely high concentrations of the sunscreen-absorbing chemicals throughout the day. Multiple sample points, multiple times throughout the day, and they found a mostly dead reef. Today, there's a massive bleaching event that's going on around the world, and particularly in my home, the Florida Keys. This is caused by elevated water temperatures. And some people like to say that the Reef Safe Sunscreen debate detracts from the climate change conversation. But sunscreen's been shown to exacerbate the effects of elevated temperatures. Basically, when corals are exposed to the environmentally relevant concentrations of these UV-absorbing chemicals, they're even more susceptible to rising temperatures. The lead researcher in that study is quoted as saying, oxybenzone exposure adds insult to injury by further weakening corals in the face of global warming. So basically, we're making it worse. We're protecting our skin, but we're making it worse. I like to say that if you remove the chemical UV absorbers from our water, you remove just one more added stress from our reefs that they really don't need. And this is a really easy one for us to eliminate. So what is a reef safe sunscreen? It's important to realize that there's currently no mutually agreed term to define what is reef safe. Because of that, brands are creating their own definitions, and blue washing is becoming the new greenwashing. Consumers are being duped, and litigation is happening, like the state of California suing the oxybenzone and paraben-containing brand that was actually named Reef Safe, along with the recent class action suits against Edgewell and Hanes Celestial. Here are some additional examples of blue washing in action. Let's be very clear. Hawaii compliant does not mean reef safe, and the courts agree with that. So how can we create reef safe products? I would like to see a global standard created that actually includes toxicity studies. I have a small company, and we did real aquatic toxicity trials, including coral larva studies, before coming to market. It's not easy, it's expensive, but it is doable. Until a global standard is defined, companies that want to use reef safe terminology, at a minimum, they should use only non-nano zinc oxide and non-nano titanium dioxide as their active ingredients. They also need to refrain from using any ingredients that have been shown to cause harm. The Hereticus Environmental Lab's HELL list is a great place to start, kind of like the name HELL list that's appropriate. You should refrain from using any of the ingredients on this list that have been shown in multiple laboratory trials to kill or deform coral larvae, and other aquatic species. I want to point out butyl-octyl salicylate on this list. That's an ingredient that since about 2007 has been popping up in more and more mineral sunscreens, and it absolutely should not be in something that is called reef safe, in my opinion. So many industry lobbyists and advocates are saying that the effect of sunscreens is still a gray area and that more research needs to be done despite the thousands of published trials that are out there raising the alarm.
1 minute left.
Thank you. I wonder if that's what the officials and the researchers said about air pollution 100 years ago, or if it's what Big Tobacco said in the 80s before they had to put those warning labels on their cancerous cigarettes. Our reef simply can't survive the dual attacks of climate change and pollution. We're seeing it every day. Society can immediately do something about pollution. Industry can immediately do something about pollution. And that's to formulate safer products across the board. As cosmetic chemists, we can make safer products. And if we can, we should. If you'd like to send me an email, you want any references or citations or copies of any of these studies, I'm absolutely happy to send them to you. You can reach me at autumn@stream2sea.com. And for those of you that are listening instead of watching, it's stream like a river, the number 2, and sea like the ocean.com. And I truly appreciate you listening, keeping an open mind.
One of the things that came up with both of you is the talk of that these the term reef safe is really ambiguous, and the terminology is used for in a variety of different ways. This first question goes to you, Autumn. How can we get the industry to agree to a single standard when there really is an incentive to keep this definitions ambiguous?
That's definitely a challenge. I mean, when the marketing companies are driving the standards, that's a problem. There's a Safe Sunscreen Council, and I think there's 11 member organizations at this point. And we were discussing creating our own standard that we could all agree upon, and we struggled. I believe there should be toxicity trials. The problem with the toxicity trials is that you have to test on fish and coral, which can be defined as animals. And in the consumer mind, as soon as you say that you're testing on animals, they think that we've got labs full of bunnies and you're torturing critters, which of course nobody wants to be doing. So it's a struggle, but a definition needs to be defined. There needs to be an organization that creates a standard, and it needs some really good publicity because the consumers are the ones that drive the change.
Now, someone actually did mention about corals being animals,
Yes.
and what's your thought on saying that these are cruelty-free products any longer?
That's a struggle. I mean, we get questioned on it all the time, and I believe, like I said, we did toxicity testing on our formulas before we came to market, and my initial formulas that I created to many of the natural standards initially failed. What if I had put those on the market and said, "Hey, I'm reef safe," and I was putting out something that was killing animals? I couldn't live with myself. So it's a struggle. We don't say that our brand's cruelty-free, although I believe it's probably as cruelty-free as you get, because what if we had done it wrong? It's a struggle. It's marketing, and so we're all in agreement that there needs to be a trial. There needs to be a standard test created, and hopefully industry, the really smart ecotoxicologists out there are working on creating some toxicity trials that don't involve hurting animals. But in the meantime, what do you do? In the meantime, how do you put something out there that the consumers want and that is safer for our environment? We have to give them good sunscreens, and we have to protect their skin. So we need to be giving them the safest options possible. And the consumers are smarter than we give them credit. They know what they want.
Yeah, but then we are also inducing it by saying, okay, these UV filters are bad and these are good for the environment. Well, there should be more research just about, because the problem is now with the whole inorganic UV filters. So what brands do now is they always say when they're using inorganic UV filters or mineral-based sunscreen, they automatically claim reef safe. Well, we should also study those. And in such a sense, we are creating then, well, what you mentioned in your presentation, extra greenwashing for the consumer. But yeah, it's a little bit sort of then not illegal, but we are not putting, we are also putting UV filters in there, which we did not even conduct tests on. So, and
it's an interesting point. Autumn, what do you say to that? The idea that zinc oxide is actually ecotoxic.
Most of the studies that have been done, so there are a handful that have shown some toxicity on zinc oxide in particular. Almost all of them out there have contained nanoparticles. So if you look at the analysis, they show the particle distribution side, and every single one of those that I've read either had a high distribution of the nanoparticle concentration, which absolutely is ecotoxic, or it's contaminated with lead. That's another issue. And the contaminants that are frequent in the zinc oxide also contribute to aquatic toxicity. So it's not necessarily the zinc oxide itself, but it's the contaminant of the raw material used. So,
but if there was a study that showed clean zinc oxide with no nanoparticles was harming reefs, would you change all your formulas?
Heck yeah, I would. You would have to. I mean, you would have to. Either that, or you have to change your branding and your names.
Yeah, what would people use other than zinc oxide for reef safe stuff?
So Perry, on my side, and it's not the most popular one, until recently we didn't use zinc oxide in any of our formulas. We started and we did our initial toxicity trials all with non-nano titanium dioxide, because that was what we found that would pass. It wasn't until just about a year and a half ago that I was able to get my hands on a zinc that actually passed aquatic toxicity trials. So titanium's a struggle to make aesthetically pleasing products, especially using non-nano, because it's the basis of white paint, right? So that was definitely a struggle for us, but that's all I would put on the market because that was all I could prove was safe.
Consumers are easily swayed by what they see on the internet or what they see by advertising. So when you say that it's consumers are demanding this, they're demanding it because marketers have convinced them that that's what they want. Most people don't even think about this topic, I would gather. But the question is, how is a consumer supposed to know what's real and what's just the marketing hype?
Yeah, I feel bad for them today. They have to do their homework. I mean, really, it's the blue washing is rampant, and the consumer has to go beyond the front of the label. They have to learn to read their ingredients, and they have to make conscious choices for themselves.
Now, on a slightly different tangent here, M has put up a question about the broader question: is the debate around reef-safe chemicals? Is that distracting from what's the primary driver of bleaching, the rising sea temperatures and causing climate change? So if you're focusing only on sunscreen, is that going to detract from addressing the larger issues of marine pollution?
Yeah, I addressed that in one of my slides in the presentation. It's absolutely, I don't think there's a marketer or a brand in the world that's going to say that sunscreen pollution is the reason corals are in decline, right? I mean, we've lost 90% of our coral reefs in the last 20 years. Climate change was a big issue, but it wasn't really the big issue from the 60s to 2000 when we lost 80% of the reef structure. It was pollution. Pollution is a huge factor, and pollution makes climate change worse. So keep using your plastic straw when we know that plastic's not the major source of pollution, or you can believe that small steps add up. If you can make a difference in your daily life, why on earth wouldn't you?
Helene, there is this idea that every effort counts. So even if sunscreens only impact a tiny amount of the oceanic pollution, why wouldn't we do this?
That's true, but there's now creating, of course, you can add like every step will help always, but we should also see at what is causing the biggest problem here. And the main problem here is also that it's also about how to sell your sunscreen in such a sense. So there's also this commercial win here. And sometimes I would say, okay, well, if you're so concerned by it, then maybe also let's look at the things which are really impacting the bleaching of the coral reefs here. And that's difficult until now. That's also not well searched. Like, what is the contribution of those UV filters, if that is really true, to the bleaching of the coral reefs actually? So it's interesting to see that this is creating such a hype and buzz. Well, this could have also been done for any other ingredient, not even only in cosmetics, but also in food or something else. And well, it's interesting to see that this is getting all the headlines. Well, it could also be like another study about another ingredient which was highlighted in the media, and then there would be a ban. So how this will happen for reefs, for the UV filters? Yeah.
Because consumers want to do better.
Yeah, but but then it's also mainly induced that the media took these studies as a big point. Well, there could also be so many other studies out there which induce or imply a certain toxicity about an ingredient. And so I find that still remarkable.
One of the things that I wonder, this reminds me of when hairspray VOCs went in effect in California. Now that you went from 80% VOC down to 55%, it made hairsprays worse. But if you look at the problem of what's causing VOCs in the state of California, it's overwhelmingly it's cars, and it's a tiny bit of hairsprays. And so even if we did nothing, would you notice a difference? So I wonder here, how much of a difference will this make if everybody switched to only creating Reef Safe Sunscreens? What impact would that have on coral reefs?
But I'd love to see it. I'd love to see that happen.
But would we notice any difference? I often hear people say that, oh, this personal care product this formula is safer than this one. And what's the evidence that that's true? And it's not epidemiological evidence, because there's nothing tying like the development of cancer to personal care products.
Right.
It's all just theoretical, but what's the real evidence?
They're sampling that in Hawaii and the Virgin Islands right now. So because of the bans that took place 2 years ago, and just recently, I believe it's 2 of the 5 counties or islands in Hawaii now have banned the organic mineral filter or the organic UV absorbers, and they're starting to sample. Let's see. I mean, if the concentrations are being significantly reduced, we are seeing that the reefs are starting to come back. Can you correlate the two? I'd like to see it.
How do you make Reef Safe Sunscreens more affordable to everybody?
I think you go back over to that education concept that we were talking about. If you apply a mineral sunscreen like you would the typical sunscreens that maybe we grew up with, you're going to use a heck of a lot more than what you really need. There's most responsible companies like mine will tell you, wear rash guards. You do not need to apply sunscreen all over your body anymore. Cover it. Apply sunscreen to your exposed skin, right? You use significantly less. I have so many people tell us that our 3-ounce tube will last them and their boyfriend or their husband an entire week's vacation at the beach, because they're only putting it on their face, on the front of their hands, their ears, their exposed skin, because they're practicing safe sunscreen habits. I don't know. Yeah, they are definitely more expensive. They're more expensive for us to produce, but I think in the long run, they're more economical.
But here we don't know yet. We don't know yet there are no clear standardized tests yet to know which UV filters will really impact or not. And so we could maybe make very affordable sunscreens with UV filters, which in the end then would say, okay, these are less toxic to the reefs actually. So the question you mentioned, I think now also reef safe sunscreens might be more expensive because brands do their own toxicity test, which cost money. And then
I think I'm the only one that's doing that. I don't think there's anybody that's doing that other than me spending that dough.
Well, I've seen some tests from other brands there, but so we don't know yet. And maybe in the future we can easily make reef safe sunscreens very cheap as when we have more data actually.
You got to prove that the other organic filters are safe for coral and fish, and so far I've never seen anything that comes close to showing that.
Now we've got a question from Gurasamy. If the actives are not water soluble, how are they reaching the coral reefs? So if people wearing the sunscreen enter the water, will the actives remain in the shore or migrate to the coral reefs with the seawater movement? Well, so how's it getting there? Yeah.
Well, that's also one of the problems which is often mentioned in those papers, actually in the critical review of Mitchell-Moore et al. That sometimes how can there concentration detected which are not possible seeing the solubility of the UV filters. So that's one of the critical points of the scientific papers at the moment.
How are they detected in our bodies? If our skin is a semi-permeable barrier, how come 98% of people the CDC sampled had oxybenzone in their bloodstream? How is it detected in our urine? How about the absorbers or the enhancers, the penetrators that help drive these into our body? Perhaps they're helping to drive them into coral. because there are studies that have been published that show these chemical ingredients inside of our coral. They're detecting them in our reef fish. If you catch tuna in Hawaii, they were detecting high concentrations within the fish species. It's there. How does it happen? Magic? No, it's great formulating. We put things in there to help enhance penetration.
Thank you so much to both of our experts and to our audience for all your great comments here.